The sound of metal clicking against small wrists cut through the autumn air like a blade, silencing the laughter of children who had been playing just moments before. 9-year-old Darius Williams stood frozen on the courthouse playground, his dark eyes wide with confusion and fear as the cold handcuffs tightened around his tiny hands behind his back. "Please, sir, he's just a child." The desperate voice of Maria Santos, a court clerk who had been watching the children during the lunch recess, pierced through the stunned silence. Her hands trembled as she reached toward the boy, only to be pushed back by Officer Bradley Hoffman, the head of the Homeowners Association security detail that had recently been contracted to patrol the courthouse grounds. The playground, which had been filled with the joyful chaos of children at play, had transformed into something resembling a crime scene. Swings hung motionless in the October breeze, their chains creaking softly, as if mourning the innocence that had been shattered. A small crowd began to gather, drawn by the commotion, their faces etched with disbelief and growing anger. Darius had been playing with his friends during the extended lunch break, waiting for his mother to finish her court session. The courthouse had installed the playground 3 years ago as part of a community outreach program, recognizing that many families spent long hours waiting for legal proceedings. It was meant to be a safe haven for children, a place where they could be kids while their parents navigated the complex world of justice. The morning had started like any other Tuesday. Judge Rachel Williams had arrived early, as was her custom, to review the cases on her docket. As one of the youngest African-American judges in the state, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that commanded respect from attorneys and court staff alike. Her son Darius had accompanied her, as he did every Tuesday when his private school had late starts for teacher meetings. "Mom, can I go to the playground when you start court?" Darius had asked that morning, his backpack slung over his shoulder as they walked through the courthouse corridors. "Of course, sweetheart. Mrs. Santos will keep an eye on you and the other children. Just remember to stay within the playground area and be respectful to everyone." Rachel had kissed his forehead before disappearing into her chambers to prepare for the day's proceedings. The courthouse had been buzzing with activity all morning. Several high-profile cases were being heard, including a contentious property dispute that had divided the local community. The HOA security team, led by Officer Hoffman, had been brought in specifically to manage the increased tensions and ensure order was maintained. Bradley Hoffman was a man who carried his authority like a weapon, always ready to be drawn. At 45, he had spent 15 years as a police officer before transitioning to private security. His reputation for being tough on disorder had made him a favorite among the more conservative elements of the community, though many questioned his methods and motivations. The incident began when Darius and 3 other children were playing a game of tag near the playground equipment. Their laughter echoed across the courtyard, mixing with the sounds of traffic and the general bustle of city life. It was the kind of innocent joy that most people would smile at. But to Officer Hoffman, it represented something entirely different. "These kids are making too much noise," he had muttered to his partner, Officer James Creek, as they patrolled the perimeter. "People are trying to conduct serious business here." Officer Creek, a newer hire who had been trying to prove himself to his superior, nodded in agreement. "Should we ask them to quiet down?" "We're going to do more than ask," Hoffman replied, his jaw set in determination. "These people need to learn that there are consequences for disturbing the peace." The 2 officers approached the playground with the swagger of men who had already decided on their course of action. The children, absorbed in their game, didn't notice them at first. It wasn't until Officer Hoffman's shadow fell across the sandbox that Darius looked up, his face breaking into an innocent smile. "Hi, officer. Are you here to play with us? The boy's question was met with a stern glare that made him take a step backward. You're disturbing the peace. Son, this is a courthouse, not a playground for hooligans. Hoffman's voice carried the weight of authority, but also something darker, a prejudice that had been festering for years. The other children, sensing the tension, began to move away from the play area. But Darius, confused and hurt by the officer's harsh tone, stood his ground. But this is the playground. My mom said I could play here while she's in court. Your mom? Hoffman's laugh was cold and mocking. Let me guess. She's here for a hearing about unpaid tickets or welfare fraud. The words hit like a physical blow. Darius's face crumpled, not fully understanding the implications, but sensing the cruelty behind them. My mom is Judge Williams. She's working. Sure she is, kid. And I'm the President of the United States. Hoffman's sarcasm was met with nervous laughter from his partner, but several courthouse employees who had been watching from the windows began to move closer. Maria Santos, who had been helping coordinate the children's activities, hurried over when she saw the confrontation developing. Officer Hoffman, there's no problem here. The children are just playing during their lunch break. There's a problem when these kids think they can run wild and disrupt court proceedings. Hoffman snapped back. This one here thinks he's special because his mommy is supposedly a judge. The situation escalated when Darius, tears now streaming down his face, tried to defend his mother. She is a judge. She's the best judge in the whole world. That's enough. Hoffman's voice boomed across the playground. You're under arrest for disturbing the peace and disorderly conduct. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Nobody moved for a moment, the absurdity of the situation leaving everyone stunned. A 9-year-old boy, arrested for playing on a playground designed for children. Attorney David Chen, who had been walking to his car after a morning hearing, stopped dead in his tracks when he saw Officer Hoffman reaching for his handcuffs. Wait a minute. You can't be serious. Stay back, sir. This is official business. Hoffman's hand moved to his radio, calling for backup even as he grabbed Darius's arm. I need immediate assistance at the courthouse playground. I have a juvenile subject resisting arrest. The lie was so blatant that several witnesses gasped audibly. Darius hadn't resisted anything. He had been standing perfectly still, too frightened to move. But Hoffman's narrative was already taking shape, and he was committed to seeing it through. As the handcuffs clicked into place, Darius let out a cry that seemed to come from the depths of his soul. It was a sound that would haunt everyone who heard it, a mixture of pain, fear, and betrayal that cut through the pretense of what was happening. The other children on the playground began to cry, their young minds struggling to process what they were witnessing. Parents who had been sitting nearby rushed to shield their children's eyes. But the damage was already done. The safe space of the playground had been transformed into a scene of trauma. This is insane, shouted Linda Rodriguez, a family law attorney who had been observing from the courthouse steps. He's a child. He was playing. Officer Creek, who had been growing increasingly uncomfortable with the situation, tried to intervene. Bradley, maybe we should... Don't you dare question me in front of these people, Hoffman hissed, his grip tightening on Darius's arm. This is exactly the kind of behavior that leads to bigger problems down the line. We're nipping it in the bud. The crowd that had gathered was growing larger and more vocal. Courthouse employees, attorneys, and visitors began pulling out their phones, recording the incident from multiple angles. The modern age of accountability was capturing every moment, every word, every gesture. Sarah Mitchell, a public defender who had been leaving after a plea hearing, immediately called her office. "I need someone down at the courthouse playground immediately. There's a child being arrested, and it's completely unjustified." Inside the courthouse, the commotion was beginning to filter through the walls. Court clerks and bailiffs exchanged worried glances as reports of the incident spread through the building like wildfire. But the person who needed to know the most was still in her chambers, completely unaware that her son was being brutalized just yards away. Judge Rachel Williams was reviewing notes for her next case when her bailiff, Thomas Jackson, burst through her door without knocking. His face was pale, his hands shaking as he struggled to find the words. "Your Honor, I need you to come outside immediately. There's a situation with Darius." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Rachel's pen clattered to the floor as she stood up, her judicial robes flowing behind her as she followed Thomas through the corridors. The sound of her heels clicking on the marble floor echoed like gunshots in the sudden silence that had fallen over the courthouse. Outside, the scene had devolved into chaos. Darius was sobbing uncontrollably, his small body trembling as Officer Hoffman paraded him toward the security vehicle. The handcuffs, designed for adult wrists, hung loose and cruel on his tiny arms. "Let me go. I want my mom." Darius's pleas were heartbreaking, but Officer Hoffman seemed immune to the child's distress. "Your mom can visit you at the juvenile detention center," Hoffman replied callously, his words carrying across the playground like a challenge to anyone who dared to oppose him. That's when Judge Rachel Williams emerged from the courthouse, her presence immediately commanding attention. She was a woman of average height, but her dignity and authority made her seem to tower over everyone present. Her dark skin seemed to glow with an inner fire as she took in the scene before her. The recognition was instantaneous. Darius's face lit up through his tears. "Mom, Mom, help me." Officer Hoffman's face went white as he realized his mistake. The woman approaching him wasn't just any concerned citizen, she was Judge Williams, one of the most respected jurists in the state. The child he had handcuffed wasn't just another troublemaker, he was the son of the woman who wielded immense power in this very building. "Release my son immediately." Rachel's voice was calm, but there was steel beneath the surface. She spoke with the authority of someone who had never been denied, never been questioned, never been challenged in such a fundamental way. Hoffman's hands shook as he fumbled with his keys, his earlier bravado evaporating like morning mist. "Your Honor, There was a disturbance. He was playing on a playground during his lunch break." Each word was delivered with surgical precision, cutting through Hoffman's feeble justifications. "Remove those handcuffs from my son right now." The crowd that had gathered watched in stunned silence as the power dynamic shifted completely. The man who had been so confident in his authority moments before was now fumbling like a schoolboy caught cheating on a test. As the handcuffs were removed, Darius ran to his mother, burying his face in her robes. His small body shook with sobs that seemed to echo across the entire courthouse complex. Rachel's arms encircled her son, her own eyes filling with tears as she felt the marks the handcuffs had left on his wrists. "It's okay, baby. Mommy's here. You're safe now." Her voice was soft, maternal, but her eyes remained fixed on Officer Hoffman with an intensity that made him step backward. The gathering crowd began to murmur, their voices rising in a crescendo of outrage and disbelief. Phone cameras continued to record, capturing not just the immediate aftermath, but the broader implications of what had just occurred. "This is what we're dealing with," said Dr. Robert Thompson, a local pediatrician who had been waiting for a child custody hearing. A 9-year-old child, handcuffed for playing on a playground. This is America in 2023. Attorney Linda Rodriguez stepped forward, her voice carrying the weight of her 20 years of legal experience. Your Honor, I witnessed this entire incident. Officer Hoffman had no justification for his actions. None whatsoever. Other witnesses began to speak up, their testimonies weaving together a narrative of injustice and prejudice that could not be ignored. The courthouse staff, many of whom had known Darius since he was a toddler, were visibly emotional. "That little boy is an angel," said Martha Stevens, who worked in the court clerk's office. "He's been coming here for years, always polite, always respectful. This is horrific." Judge Williams finally looked up from her son, her judicial composure returning as she surveyed the scene. Court is adjourned for the remainder of the day. All pending cases will be rescheduled. The announcement sent shockwaves through the building. Judge Williams had never adjourned court for anything short of a natural disaster or medical emergency. The implications were clear. This incident would not be swept under the rug or handled quietly. Furthermore, she continued, her voice carrying across the playground, I am immediately calling for a comprehensive investigation into the conduct of the HOA security team at this courthouse. This incident will be reported to the City Attorney's Office, the State Judicial Board, and the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice. Officer Hoffman, who had been hoping the situation might blow over, realized that his career was likely over. The weight of his actions, caught on camera and witnessed by dozens of people, would follow him for the rest of his life. Your Honor, I was just doing my job. Your job? Rachel's voice cut through his protest like a sword. Your job is to protect and serve this community, not to terrorize children who are guilty of nothing more than playing and laughing. The crowd erupted in applause, their support for the judge overwhelming. But Rachel wasn't finished. She had more to say, and everyone present knew that her words would echo far beyond the courthouse walls. This incident represents everything that is wrong with our society's approach to authority and prejudice. A 9-year-old child was profiled, terrorized, and physically restrained because someone in a position of power decided that his joy, his laughter, his very presence was a threat. Her words were being broadcast live on social media, shared and reshared by witnesses who understood the historical significance of what they were witnessing. The hashtag Justice for Darius began trending within hours, turning a local incident into a national conversation. Dr. Amanda Foster, a child psychologist who had been at the courthouse for an expert testimony, approached Judge Williams with visible concern. Your Honor, I'd like to offer my services to help Darius process this trauma. This kind of incident can have lasting effects on a child's development. Rachel nodded gratefully, still holding her son close. Thank you. That would be very helpful. The aftermath of the incident unfolded rapidly. Within hours, the courthouse was flooded with reporters, civil rights activists, and concerned citizens. The parking lot became a staging ground for impromptu rallies and press conferences. Mayor Patricia Williams, no relation to the judge, arrived at the courthouse within 2 hours of the incident. Her face was grim as she surveyed the scene, understanding immediately that this would become a defining moment for her administration. This is unacceptable, she announced to the gathered reporters. I am immediately suspending the HOA security contract with the courthouse and launching a full investigation into their practices. The reverberations extended far beyond the immediate consequences for Officer Hoffman. The incident sparked a broader conversation about the militarization of security in public spaces, the treatment of children in the justice system, and the persistent reality of racial profiling in America. Within the courthouse, the mood was somber but determined. Staff members who had watched Darius grow up were visibly shaken by what they had witnessed. Many had tears in their eyes as they recalled the sound of his crying and the sight of him in handcuffs. "I've worked in this courthouse for 23 years," said James Patterson, a senior bailiff. "I've never seen anything like this. That little boy, he's like family to all of us." The support for Judge Williams and her family was overwhelming. Colleagues from across the state called to offer their assistance, their outrage, and their solidarity. The incident had touched a nerve that extended far beyond the local community. As the day progressed, the story gained national attention. Major news networks picked up the footage, and civil rights organizations began organizing responses. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People announced that they would be sending representatives to investigate the incident. "This is exactly the kind of systemic prejudice that we have been fighting against for decades," said Dr. Marcus Johnson, a local NAACP chapter president. "A child was criminalized for existing while black. This cannot stand." The legal implications were swift and severe. Officer Hoffman found himself facing potential criminal charges, civil lawsuits, and the complete destruction of his career. His partner, Officer Creek, was also suspended pending investigation, though many witnesses noted that he had seemed uncomfortable with the situation from the beginning. Judge Williams, meanwhile, was focused on her son's well-being. She had taken him home immediately after the incident, but the trauma was evident in his behavior. He clung to her, afraid to let her out of his sight. "Mom, why did that man hurt me?" Darius asked that evening, his voice small and confused. "I was just playing." Rachel's heart broke as she struggled to find words that could explain the inexplicable. How do you tell a 9-year-old that he was targeted because of the color of his skin? How do you maintain their innocence while preparing them for a world that might not always be fair? "Sometimes, sweetheart, people make very bad choices. That man made a terrible choice today, and he's going to face consequences for it. But you did nothing wrong. You were just being a kid, and that's exactly what you should have been doing." The community response continued to grow. Local businesses began displaying signs of support, and a fund was established to provide resources for other families who had experienced similar incidents. The playground incident had become a rallying cry for justice and change. 3 days after the incident, Judge Williams returned to court. The hallways were lined with supporters, courthouse staff, and fellow judges who had come to show their solidarity. The scene was emotional, with many people openly weeping as they saw her arrive. "Thank you all for your support," she said to the gathered crowd. "This incident has been traumatic for my family, but it has also shown me the incredible power of a community that stands together for justice." The investigation into the HOA security company revealed a pattern of complaints and questionable practices. Officer Hoffman's employment history showed previous incidents of excessive force and racial profiling, raising questions about how he had been hired for such a sensitive position. The courthouse implemented immediate changes. New security protocols were established, emphasizing de-escalation and community policing principles. The playground was redesigned with additional safety features and clearer guidelines for children's activities. Most importantly, the incident led to broader policy changes throughout the city. New regulations were established for private security companies, requiring better training and accountability measures. The incident became a case study in how communities could respond to injustice with swift, decisive action. Officer Hoffman was ultimately terminated from his position and faced criminal charges for child endangerment and civil rights violations. His career in law enforcement was over, and he became a symbol of the consequences that should follow when authority is abused. The civil lawsuit filed on behalf of Darius and his family was settled for a significant amount. But more importantly, it included provisions for systemic changes and ongoing monitoring of security practices at public facilities. 6 months later, the courthouse held a special ceremony to honor the community's response to the incident. Darius, now more confident and surrounded by supporters, was presented with a key to the city by the mayor. "This young man represents the best of our community," Mayor Williams said during the ceremony. "His courage in the face of injustice and his family's commitment to turning trauma into positive change inspire us all." The playground where the incident occurred was renamed the Darius Williams Community Playground, serving as a permanent reminder of the importance of protecting children and standing against prejudice. A plaque was installed with the inscription, "In memory of childhood innocence, and in honor of a community that chose justice over silence." Judge Williams continued to serve on the bench with renewed purpose. The incident had changed her, giving her a deeper understanding of the challenges faced by families in her courtroom. She became an advocate for juvenile justice reform and worked to ensure that other children would never experience what her son had endured. Darius eventually returned to playing at the courthouse playground, though he was now accompanied by additional safeguards and the watchful eyes of a community that had learned an important lesson about the power of standing together against injustice. The incident had lasting effects on everyone involved. For the courthouse staff, it was a reminder that their roles extended beyond administrative duties to protecting the most vulnerable members of their community. For the legal professionals who witnessed it, it reinforced their commitment to justice and equality. The story of what happened that October afternoon spread far beyond the local community. It became a teaching moment in law schools, a case study in criminal justice courses, and a rallying cry for civil rights organizations across the country. But perhaps most importantly, it became a testament to the resilience of a child who refused to let injustice define him, and the power of a community that chose to stand up and say, "Not here, not now, not ever." Years later, when Darius was asked about that day, he would remember not just the fear and confusion, but also the overwhelming love and support that surrounded him afterward. He would remember his mother's strength, the community's outrage, and the way justice ultimately prevailed. The playground incident became more than just a story about injustice. It became a story about hope, resilience, and the power of a community to transform trauma into positive change. It stood as proof that even in the darkest moments, the light of justice could shine through, illuminating a path toward a better future for all children. The echoes of that October afternoon would continue to resonate, reminding everyone who heard the story that justice is not just about punishment for wrongdoing, but about creating a world where all children can play, laugh, and grow without fear. In the end, that was the most important lesson of all, that the playground should always be a place of joy, and that it is the responsibility of every adult to ensure that it remains so.